It's time for us to begin our look at languages. I personally love languages and I'm fascinated by them. Well, what is a language? What constitutes language? Think about it. What do you see as language? If you had to define it, how would you define it? Well, here we go. Language is a system of communication made up of a collection of sounds and or symbols that are understood and recognized by its users. This includes things like body language or social cues. You're probably acutely aware that some people are excellent at picking up on body language and social cues, other people less so. Do the other non-human animals have language? I wonder this all the time, don't you? Is your dog communicating with you? Is your cat communicating with you? Do they communicate with each other? Do other animals communicate with each other through some version of language? Clearly, language plays an important role in continuing and spreading culture, human culture. We're going to focus on English and its closely related languages because right now you're either listening to me and or reading me, if you're looking at the captions down below, in English, but we're going to look at lots of languages and forms of languages. Take a look at this. Welcome, bienvenue, benvido, bienvenido, willkommen, Witamy was. Dobro pożalować. There you go. Look at this incredible list of languages. It's just awesome, all saying the same thing. Throughout history, most of human language was exclusively in the spoken format. In other words, not in a written format. There have been, through time, tens of thousands of languages. Almost in totality, they were exclusively spoken languages. Think about the disadvantage of having an exclusively spoken language. The written format of a language changes the game. And there have been, through time, several generally agreed upon culture hearths for writing. So in other words, the written format, a literary tradition for language. Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, Mesoamerica, South Central Asia, which is northern India, the Indus River Valley, which is in Pakistan, and Rapa Nui, which is also known as Easter Island. We're going to go through those culture hearths for the written form of language. Starting with Mesopotamia, as seems to be the case over and over and over, no? Mesopotamia is in Iraq, in other words, the area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. As we already know, Mesopotamia literally means the land between the rivers. This is probably the first place the written language began to occur and evolve, about 5,500 years ago. And it took the form of something that's known as cuneiform. This probably started, cuneiform in other words, as a method of accounting for trade. In other words, there were 15 baskets of wheat and 12 goats and 27 cattle, like that. That's probably the way it started. And then it evolved into a written form of language. Eventually, it evolved into symbols that represented the ideas and the nouns and the sounds of the Sumerian language. If you recall, I mentioned the Sumerians in other lessons earlier in this semester. Variations on this were adopted by many other languages in the region, and that allowed them to become written languages. Now, it survived in its written form until about 75 AD. So cuneiform continued to be a written language for thousands of years. This is what it looks like. On the left-hand side, you can see that's an up-close of cuneiform. On the right-hand side, you can see the Code of Hammurabi, which is written on this pillar. You can find this in the Louvre in Paris. If you ever go to Paris, you can go in and see the Mesopotamian art that the French have purloined. And indeed, right there is the Code of Hammurabi. I hate to say this, it's not really legal, but I have actually put my hand on this. You're not supposed to do that, but I did it one time because it was the Code of Hammurabi, which was the first codified laws on Earth, at least as far as anybody knows. In Egypt, shortly thereafter, so as much as 5,300 years ago, the written form of the ancient Egyptian language began to evolve. This is what's commonly called hieroglyphics, which is a form of pictographs. Pictographs are pictures like drawings of objects or people or things or ideas. And it's thought that these hieroglyphics evolved in the first true alphabets. In other words, specific characters represent specific ideas, objects, and importantly, sounds. Now, hieroglyphics, pictographs from the ancient Egyptian language, were both carved and imprinted, for example, onto rock, and they were written on papyrus paper. Papyrus was made out of a kind of reedy plant that grows naturally along the Nile River Valley, and the ancient Egyptians figured out a way to manufacture that into paper and then write on that paper. This is a version of a pictograph. Do you know what that means? How about that? See, you can read pictographs. Who knew? Yeah, it means no smoking. These are ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So you can see right here where I'm circling, that's hieroglyphics. These are hieroglyphics right here. These are hieroglyphics. This is actually telling a story. This is Ramses II, as in the guy who dealt with Moses. And these are his soldiers. And as gruesome as this may be, they are pouring baskets of hands cut off from human beings in front of Ramses as a kind of tribute after winning a war and then cutting off the hands of the people that they killed in the war. Yeah, I know, it's gruesome. On the left-hand side, you have the Rosetta Stone, the very famous Rosetta Stone, which is in the British Museum in London. It was found in 1799 by the French, and then eventually the British acquired it, and they put it in the British Museum. I think it's been there for 200 years or so. The important thing about the Rosetta Stone is this. It's written in Greek, Demotic, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Demotic was a kind of alphabetic form of Egyptian hieroglyphics that eventually evolved. Neither the Demotic nor the Egyptian hieroglyphics, prior to the finding of the Rosetta Stone, could be read. But ancient Greek could be read by scholars. You can see it down at the bottom here. This is ancient Greek, and this is Demotic up here. And what happened was they figured out that on the Rosetta Stone, all three of these languages were saying the same thing. And because they could read the Greek, they could eventually decipher both the Demotic and the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and that opened up the ability to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. In China, written language also evolved. Began about 4,000 or so years ago. It's a set of pictographs, and eventually several thousand of them evolved. You can see on the left-hand side a Chinese oracle bone from about 3,000 years ago and the pictographs that are on it. And then you can see the modern Chinese characters. One of the brilliance of written Chinese is this. Chinese actually comes in multiple formats, Mandarin, Cantonese being the two most famous. But in addition to that, the Japanese, who have two different versions of writing, utilize Chinese characters for one of their forms of writing. And if you can read the Chinese characters, you can actually read what somebody who speaks a very different language is writing down. It would be the equivalent of me writing something down in English and then somebody who spoke Romanian exclusively and somebody else who spoke Italian exclusively and somebody else who spoke French exclusively being able to read it. It's pretty spectacular. In Mesoamerica, which is southern Mexico and northern Central America, language also evolved about 3,000 years ago in a written format. This started with the Olmecs and the Maya, and it eventually spread to other groups of indigenous people like the Zapotecs and the Aztecs. It's a form of pictographs, and it's completely independent in terms of its written evolution. The languages that evolved into a written literary format in what would commonly be called the Old World, which would be every place in the Eurasian continent and Africa, those languages probably had ties to each other in the written format. In the case of what happened in Mesoamerica, it had no ties to any other languages in the world. They independently evolved their own form of writing, which looks like this. This is Mayan stela on the left-hand side and the pictographic writing, which is sometimes called glyphs. In Central Asia, through kind of northern India, Sanskrit evolved into a written format about 3,500 years ago in all likelihood. The most important thing that came out of it originally were the Vedas, or the Vedic script, which is the Hindu religious scriptures. And it was highly influential in South and Southeast Asia. You could see Sanskrit on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side at the top, you could see Hindi, which is spoken throughout northern India, and then the bottom right-hand side, you could see Thai. I think you could see the relationship between these languages. Can you see that? The written format? Very good. Then in the Indus River Valley, which is Pakistan, northern India, perhaps 4,500 years ago, and probably made up of pictographs, languages began to evolve in that written format. Eventually, they had maybe 400 unique symbols. Unfortunately, they're completely unreadable because there is no Rosetta Stone for this. There isn't something that somebody has found that translates a language that people can read into these languages from the Indus River Valley. But they look like this. You can see on the left-hand side is a kind of stamp, and you would press that into the clay, and then that would create this written form of the language. But unfortunately, as I said, nobody knows what it means. And then on Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island, the southern Pacific Ocean, where the country, the island, was dominated by Polynesian culture, there's a written form of a language that has an unknown origin to it. Perhaps it's 900 years ago that it started. And what happened was they took wooden tablets and they inscribed them with pictographs of humans and animals. It's called Rongorongo in the Rapa Nui language today, but it is, again, unreadable. If you look at the left-hand side, you can see it on one of these wooden tablets, and you can see a close-up over here on the right-hand side. This is a very, very common symbol. It gets used in lots of things, including like surf culture. It gets used. And you can see over here also, this is probably a bird. You can see a fish here. You can see another bird over here. So this, unfortunately, also is unreadable because, again, there is no Rosetta Stone for it, and there's no one left who knows how to read it.